All right. G'day, g'day. Welcome back to Collectivitis. My name's Pietro. Uh, I am joined today by the always controversial and always memorable and always exciting John Ruddick, MLC for the Upper House for New South Wales. How are you, John?
Terrific, Pietro. Good to see you again, mate. And thank you for writing the booklet, What is Libertarianism? We find it's a very, very good tool. We find 50% of people who read that booklet will be then a libertarian. So that all we've got to do is get it out there a lot more.
50%. That's a pretty good strike rate. I think I remember you were saying that if everyone knew what libertarianism was, we'd get about 10% of the population. Is that am I misremembering, or was that you?
No, that would have been my guess. But, there was a poll out, a Gallup poll, a fairly credible poll in the United States a little while ago. And it asked Americans to say, do you consider yourself a socialist, a liberal, a conservative, or a libertarian? And the Libertarians got 21% in the United States. Now, because they don't have preferential voting, et cetera, most of them are in the Republican Party. But I still think the Libertarian Party of America, I mean, we are lucky in this country, A, for preferential voting, and B, for proportional representation in our upper houses, which they don't have in the United States. But what the US Libertarian Party does serve a very, very positive purpose in that it just provides intellectual purity and intellectual boldness for libertarians to inspire libertarians all around the world. And that's certainly the case in the New South Wales division and the Ballarat branch, I understand.
Yeah, very much so. I mean, yeah, they always have that problem there, the libertarians, where the Republicans can say, "Hey, if you don't vote Republican, we're going to end up with a Democrat." So you
Yeah.
can't be purist and idealist. And to an extent, we get that here, but we have preferential voting, so it's just trying to confuse people who don't know how our voting system works. I find whenever
Yeah.
Liberal or Labor talk like that, it's even more bizarre here because it's preying on people being so uneducated about how the voting system works. And sometimes that works, which is scary.
Oh, I'm sure it works a lot. But the first set, so we are lucky that the people who wrote our, parliamentary constitutions, etc., did give us proportional representation. Okay, and we do have preferential voting, which a lot of people on the right think, oh, it's terrible, it's terrible. Why is that? They think it's terrible because the Greens are the biggest beneficiary of it, and that is true at the moment. However, if the minor right can get the act together, you and I hope it'll be the Libertarian Party which dominates that space. Well, then we'll be able to use it to just as positive effect as the Greens have done it over the last 20 years.
Yeah, well, and that's right. And there's what was it? The Australian Democrats were the last ones who weren't the Greens to use that somewhat effectively. So we've got to fill that gap. And One Nation, I mean, One Nation do use it. We're trying to almost take their place as the actual alternative to the Liberals. Um, I know you've been doing a lot of work in that space, but what I actually wanted to talk with you today, John, is something that I know you've been talking about, and I know you have a keen interest in, and so do I. And in many ways, that topic is the US election coming up in November.
Yeah.
And I mean, in many ways, as much as we're not Americans and we don't get to vote on the US election, and we to actual Americans, we would just be two weird Australians who are talking about their country and shouldn't know anything about it. But in many ways, the US election actually affects us in an enormous way as well. Um, so I suppose the first thing I wanted to ask you regarding the US election before we talk about the candidates and the issues and this and that and whatever is what is your pitch as to whether Australians should care about the US election?
Okay. Well, the first point is that everything else aside, the American presidential elections every 4 years are magnificent theatre. Okay. So even if you're not interested in politics, it's sort of like, struggles for the control of ancient Rome. So the personalities are so big, the tension's so big, the stakes are so high. So that's the first reason Australians. Far more substantive reasons why Australians should be interested in it is that, rightly or wrongly, Australia's got 1 million military alliances with the United States. Okay, so we've got ANZUS, we've got AUKUS, we've got the Quad, we've got the Five Eyes, just goes on and on and on and on. And so therefore, the American foreign policy at the moment is to, in this part of the world, is to encircle and confront China. And so now, and we are basically America's massive aircraft carrier in this part of the world. Okay, and this is happening under Liberal prime ministers, right-wing Liberal prime ministers, centre-right Liberal prime ministers, left-wing Liberal prime ministers, left-wing Labor prime ministers, right-wing Labor prime ministers, Rudd, Gillard, Albo. You know, the Americans come out here and say, oh, you know, we've got to muscle up against China. You know, we've got to get, don't we've got to listen to Winston Churchill, not George Washington, and we've got to, you know, be aggressive, got to be on the front foot. Now, what I fear is going to happen at some point, Pietro, is that the United States, with their $36 trillion debt, could be at some point going to seriously withdraw from this part of the world. Okay, not out of ideological rationality, which is, you know, non-intervention in the rest of the world, but because of, you know, financial handbrakes. Okay, now then, if that happens, and we have been out there out loud and proud as the deputy sheriff, well, the sheriff might leave town at some point. And then they might leave town ingloriously at some point. And then we're stuck here because American engagement in the Asia Pacific is always optional. But for Australia, the Asia Pacific is permanent. So we have to think, we love Australia. We love everything about Australia. And we very much want Australia to be Australia in another 500 years, another 1,000 years. So we've got to accept that we've got a neighbourhood that we've got to sort of try and maintain harmony with. Try and maintain long-term harmony with. And so being out there with all these military alliances, yes, it's extremely important to us, the result of the American election, because Kamala Harris is pro, the Democrats have become the military wing, the political wing of the military industrial complex. And how that happened was, you know, the Republicans for the first half of this century were the pro-war party. Dick Cheney and all the boys, regime change, 5 failed wars on the trot. And but then because Trump comes along in 2015 in the primary and he says, oh, well, you know, I think those regime wars were a disgrace and a waste of money and it didn't achieve anything we wanted them to achieve. And so therefore the Never Trumpers, which is the military industrial complex, they said that Trump's terrible. Trump still won the primary. They're all in a tizzy. They run away back to their natural home in the big state, big war-loving Democrats. And the Democrats by this stage are just so anti-Trump, they'll just accept anybody who's anti-Trump. They'll say, yeah, come on in, neocons. Now, the neocons are not idiots, and they very quickly grab the levers of power. And they've said to and now the Democrats say, oh, yeah, we've got to have a war over that border dispute in Ukraine, and we've got to, you know, one thing after another. And so Trump, we know, is not an intellectual, but I think he's got very good common sense. And, you know, one of the reasons when they really started hating him in 2015 is he sat down with an NBC interview and he says, he was asked, you know, would you meet with Putin? He says, yeah, I'd like to meet with Putin. Yeah, I'd like to have good relations. Oh, that was just the worst thing that can possibly be said. Okay, because they've been encircling Russia since the fall of the Berlin Wall. And so that's, yeah, so, yeah, gee, how terrible is that? Trump wants to sort of have good relations with the country with the second most amount of nuclear bombs. And it's a Christian country, you know, and it's not Switzerland. Okay, we know Russia's a tough country. Okay, but the long-term trend is up. They've had 1,000 years of the dreadful czars, and barely any of them were any good. 1 or 2 of them was okay. They were very autocratic, and a lot of people suffered. A lot of Jewish pogroms, you know, in Russia in the late 19th century, early 20th century. Dreadful stuff. But, you know, they've been very nasty to minorities for centuries. And they were bad. Then they get replaced by the Soviet Union. Okay, you know, millions and millions and millions in the gulag, in the death camps, blah blah blah, running out of food. Surprise, surprise. With the hardcore socialism, and so, you know, the poor old Russian people have suffered a lot. And now, you know, since the fall of when Yeltsin stood on top of the tank in 1991 and the Soviet Union came down, which is a magnificent day, things are getting better. Okay, now it's, you know, it's not Australia. Okay, and, you know, you hear about bad things that happen there. Okay, so if worst case is, you know, a couple of dozen journalists have been killed. Now that's absolutely shocking and terrible. Okay, and Putin says it's a Western fabrication. Who knows where the truth is? But let's say it's true that 24 journalists have died. Okay, who are anti-Putin. Could well be true. Well, okay, so it's not great, but I mean, a couple of generations ago, you've got, 5, 10, 15 million people in the gulags. Okay, so I'm saying that the trend line is better. So what George Washington taught the Americans in his farewell address, which is a brilliant statement on foreign policy, he says, look, try to see good in other countries. Try to sort of find common ground, try to extend our commercial relations. Let's not meddle in their politics. And so that's what Trump's approach has been.
Well, okay, there's there's a lot there, and I think you've already touched on some of the other things that that I did want to talk about. So, uh, well, okay, there's a whole load of issues which are currently facing Americans and which the American government has either already got policy on or is going to have to make policy on. One of them, which I think is incredibly important, is the disastrous war that they're pushing Ukraine into with Russia and pushing probably, possibly the world on the brink of nuclear war by, this posturing that is designed to try and create division between the two countries. But there's a whole lot of other issues. You've already mentioned the massive debt. What was it, 36 trillion? I'm not up to date. I know that they're paying over $1 trillion now just on the interests on the debt every year, which is insane to think about. Uh, you've got to think that tower is about to collapse. The border, there's immigration, which is a huge issue, which Trump has been championing. Um, and then if you look at what a Democrat would say, there's rampant racism and they need to reinstate Roe v. Wade or whatever it is. So there's a whole, swirl of issues which could be considered the Flagstaff issues of this election. You've already mentioned a couple. Feel free to mention those again. But what do you think are the most important things, actually important, not necessarily the ones that will end up deciding the election, because we know that sometimes elections can be decided over stupid issues. But what do you think are the most important things that this next president will have to grapple with?
Well, we've both mentioned the debt, and I think it's 35, 36 trillion. And the terrible news is it's going up about $1 trillion every 100 days. It certainly was at some point this year. And even worse than that is that no one's talking about it except for the Libertarians. Okay. So, Ross Perot ran for president in 1992, a billionaire at the time. At that point, a billionaire is, pretty unusual. And he got 19% of the vote. Now, he was quite a likable guy. But now his big, massive thing was the then US federal deficit. He said, look, it's just out of control. He said, well, vote for me and I'll bring it under control. Now, he didn't win, but what he did do was he pushed the two major parties massively into a debt reduction mindset. So we get to about the year, so Bill Clinton won that election. But then really, it was really Newt Gingrich and the Republicans that governed America at that point in time, certainly the budget issues. And they, really cut taxes and paid off the debt and deregulated and boom, boom, boom. So it can, but now this debt now, this is the big libertarian criticism of the Federal Reserve. They're saying, when we had the debt was basically paid off in just before 9/11. Not as simple as that, but anyway. But then 9/11 happens when they say, okay, we're going to have these regime wars. They're going to cost a lot of money. Now, if Bush and Cheney had said, well, to fund these regime wars, we're all going to tax you an extra 7%, which is pretty much about what you'd need. Then the people would say, well, hang on. Is there an alternative to this? Is there an alternative to this? And there would have been more scrutiny on it. But now they've got the Federal Reserve is sort of like in medieval times, the king would be able to wind up the mint. Just print more money, just create more money out of thin air. So, oh, don't worry, we don't have to tax you. We're just going to create more money. That's how we'll pay the military to go and do these things. And everyone sort of doesn't notice it. Same thing happened with COVID. If we were all told that we all had to pay an extra 5% in tax to fund the COVID stuff, people would say, well, maybe we're going too far here, but we didn't notice. People just go, oh, I've got free money here. Thanks, government. But they've just, of course, wound up the mint. They've just created more money. That devalues all the existing money in the system and puts our kids into more debt and ourselves into more debt, of course. So the debt is just so. Look, I'm sort of thinking the only way that they can handle this debt now is to actually default on it. Now, it's probably above my pay grade to see what would be the repercussions of that. But I mean, how on earth are they going to first they've got to stop spending more. Now, not even Trump, who I've got a high opinion of, not even he's talking about it. They've got to cut spending. No one's talking about cutting spending. Okay, so that's the big issue. Now, then, of course, massive issue, which you mentioned, called the immigration. Okay, well, I think it's very obvious what's happening here. The Democrats basically are pro-illegal immigration because it's bringing in new voters. That's the bottom line. That's the simple line. That's why the Republicans are very anti. Well, they also sort of don't want the criminal class from Guatemala and Venezuela coming in. Gee, what a terrible policy that is. Oh, you'd have to be a fascist to believe in that. You don't want people coming out of the jail in Central America, etc. But the Democrats want it to happen. Now, then you get close to an election and they pretend that they're tough on the border. Okay, well, it's the first thing that they did. And the reason Trump won the nomination in 2015 is he said, build the wall. Really simple. And it's a huge issue. I've been to the United States twice in my life. I went in 1996. I went in 2009. And there was a huge difference. As soon as I got off the airport at Los Angeles, half the signs in Spanish. Okay, now. So it's all, one thing Australia's always been better at than America is the border. And, we've militarized our border. And we've had a left-wing Prime Minister in there, Anthony Albanese, and he has 100% maintained the Tony Abbott policy. That was one of the very good things Tony Abbott did. And we've stopped the human smuggling, and that's a good thing. And so we've still got too much immigration, but generally speaking, they are sort of middle class people from these countries. Okay, still too many. Okay, we've got to pause that. So then, look, then the other, of course, then we've talked about the military-industrial complex, which is a big deal. Then we're just talking about the the sort of the police state that's just will descend upon America in the event that Kamala wins. Now, it'll be imperceptible, like it's happened in California. It's not like they're going to crack down and become, East Germany overnight. But they are heading in that trend. The disinformation bills and everything else, they are definitely trying to erect a very, very, very bossy government. And so they're the big issues.
Yeah, well, and I think it's incredibly comical talking about the border, how the Democrats now will try and say that it's Trump who's blocking the latest border bill when they try to ram something through after his entire presidency was spent calling him a racist for wanting to build a wall. And it just plays on such a low opinion of your voters' intelligence. Like that, you've got to think so little of the people that you want to vote for you to believe that they can swallow this lie, or they're just so into the tribalism of team one or team two. I mean, there's lots of those issues. Well, let's start talking about Trump first, and I mean, we can talk about Kamala later, but Kamala's almost an easier topic to talk about because Trump, I find some of the things that he there's definitely some upsides, as you mentioned, of things that Trump would represent. Now, a lot of the upsides are almost upsides only by comparison to Kamala, because I think, for example, the fact that he's not talking about the debt, he's not a solution on that angle. The fact that he was a little iffy on the Ukraine-Russia thing until he brought RFK on, and now the fact that RFK's whole reason for running, aside from the medical stuff, was to try and end that war with Ukraine and Russia. I think that's a positive, but it doesn't give me a lot of hope for Trump's instincts alone on that issue. He's in love with tariffs. He seems to be just as hostage to the Netanyahu and Israel lobby as anyone else, and promises all the money in the world for them to continue their wars over there, which I don't even know your thoughts on that thing. But there's certainly some things on both sides of Trump. Certainly some things even to be negative about Trump. So all things considered, let's say Trump does win, assuming that there's no election fraud or another bullet or something wild and imperceivable like that. So a second Trump presidency, do you think it's actually something worth getting excited for? And what does that look like? Let's say it happens.
Well, look, Trump, you sort of get the impression that he's barely read a book since school. Okay.
Yes.
So we wouldn't call him an intellectual. So I'm sure he's not familiar with Murray Rothbard, etc. But he's got extraordinarily high common sense and street smarts. And I think he's got good instincts. And I think he basically loves the American founding principles, and he loves capitalism. And so he believes in patriotism, okay? And he's, basically got good values, okay, which he doesn't have to think about that much. They just come naturally to him because he has been the embodiment of the American dream. He's just gone out there and built. These aren't just buildings that he's built. I mean, they are absolute works of art, the Trump Towers around the place. And it's not like it's in Adelaide or Birmingham or Berlin. It's in New York, Manhattan. He's building the best buildings in the greatest flock of skyscrapers in world history. So there's something, and then he owns the Miss Universe competition. He becomes a massive reality celebrity. Okay, he's just always been a celebrity. Okay, the left used to love him. Okay, NBC used to love him. Okay, and then he's run for president, and he's quite an extraordinary figure. And now you mentioned the tariffs. Okay, now no libertarians are going to defend him on tariffs, and I'm not going to start. Okay, I will say this. He was on Oprah Winfrey in the 1980s, and she speculated about him running for president all the way back then. He said, no, I probably wouldn't be interested, but if I did, yeah, blah, blah, blah. In that interview, he says how much he loves tariffs. So he has been very consistent on the silly tariffs. It's bad, okay? Tariffs are stupid. Tariffs are counterproductive. And we know all the reasons why. Your very intelligent viewers will know the reasons why. But I would just sort of add this. I say, look, all taxes are bad. All taxes create disincentives. Income tax is bad. Income tax deters people working. Okay, so it's just another tax. Okay, it's and I think he's going to be. I think he talks a big game on the tariffs. I think I read something today. He's not going to impose them on Australia, so he's only going to impose them on China. Okay, and countries that he doesn't like. Okay, so it's not good. But I mean, if that's our biggest criticism of him, well, Kamala's absolutely terrible on everything. Okay, so Trump. Look, the most encouraging thing about Trump is, from a libertarian perspective, he has said if he wins between the election and the inauguration, he's going to have a peace conference between Putin and Zelensky, and that's a good thing. And he's basically going to bring that war to an end. And we know that because he's going to say to Zelensky, no more money. Okay, and what's going to happen is you've got in the 15% slither of eastern Ukraine, you've got largely ethnic Russians living there who, rightly or wrongly, feel they have not been treated well by Kiev. They watch Russian TV, they follow Russian sport, they speak Russian at home and at school. And so it's a border dispute. It's very ugly. It's very unfortunate. But we do not want to have a superpower conflict over it. There's no indication that Putin's got any interest in going any further west. Okay, and it's just a NATO lie. So that's a good thing about Trump now. And I think, look, he basically, in his first term, he just governed, except for the foreign policy, where I think he gets an exceptional pass. On the domestic policy, the economic policy, he was basically just a better than average Republican president. Cut taxes, cut deregulation. He's skeptical of global warming, openly comes out and says he doesn't believe in it. That's another reason why they hate his guts, because that's their favorite thing, that and war. So he's basically, besides those two big issues, he's basically just another American Republican president. Okay,
he did fail. He did fail massively on the COVID regime stuff. And for example, DeSantis was a much better than him, and Trump still struggles. Not just still struggles, still refuses to admit any culpability or to even talk back any of the initial stuff he'd said about the vaccine and stuff like that. So I think that's a big blind spot in Trump's judgment as well.
Well, okay, look, on the COVID thing, except for libertarians, all around the world, everybody fell for it. Okay, I remember early on in Australia, about April 2020, I was watching a Sky News report, I think it was Paul Murray, and had a poll up saying, you know, do you think the government's doing the right response to COVID? And that was about 78% of people said yes. And about another 10% of people said, we don't think they're doing enough to stop COVID. And 7% in the very early days said, I think the government's being excessive. And I thought to myself, well, that's pretty good, 7%. There's a base here. There's 7%, that's a couple of million Australians, I thought, and that would be similar in the United States. So Trump was a victim to the mass hysteria. He's got an election just around the corner. He couldn't sort of sit back and sort of, you know, say what we were saying. Now, yes, he was all over the warp speed vaccines. He just got tricked by Anthony Fauci. He got tricked by all the deep state, okay? And he sort of went along with it, and he shouldn't have gone along with it, okay? But it was hard at that time to resist the hysteria when you're a politician aiming for 51% of the vote. Now, and yes, DeSantis, absolutely. Now, DeSantis took his time, wasn't as good as the Libertarians, but then he was terrific, good on him. And Sweden was the best from the very beginning. Okay, now, but as time went on, you know, Trump would get criticized by the left for, you know, being dismissive of masks and being dismissive, and they'd always attack him. COVID, I'm convinced that COVID was hyped up so much as a way to bring down Trump, and it worked, and so Trump was very mixed on COVID. I remember when he got COVID himself, about 6 weeks before the election in 2020. He comes out of hospital, he goes up onto the West Wing, the big balcony up there, and he takes his mask off. He says, look, it's time for America to get back to normal. That took courage. So it's mixed. I think libertarians like Dave Smith and others, and Tom Woods, I think they're a little bit unfair to Trump on the COVID BS.
Well, that's fair enough. I'm a big fan of Dave Smith and Tom Woods. Maybe you could hear their words and what I was saying. But okay, so and I look, I do agree with you, and it must be said that if you're looking at Trump objectively, yes, there's stuff to criticize, stuff not to criticize. But if you look at the comparison that there must be a choice between Trump and Kamala, then Trump becomes your very, very obvious preferable choice of the two. Even just ending the Ukraine war, I think, is reason enough to vote for Trump, because that is catastrophic. It's US policy that by funding it with the express intention of hurting Russia with their own war on their border has killed millions of Ukrainians. They had a deal negotiated in 2022, which the Americans told Boris Johnson to go and break up. So just that alone would be reason enough, I think, to vote for Trump. But when we compare him to his rival, so let's say Kamala at this point, but Biden, I think they're almost synonymous, the two, for what they represent. I think they represent a husk of a person that is supposed to be propped up by the Democratic establishment. But let's be even. So do you think what do you think of Kamala Harris, first of all? And is there anything positive you can say about the Kamala campaign, or is it just doom and gloom?
Well, about a year ago, I came to the view that they just won't run Joe Biden. He was clearly in decline, and I strongly came to that view. Now, then I thought to myself for some months that they would replace him with Gavin Newsom. But then I thought, well, if they're going to remove Joe, then the official next cab off the rank is Kamala, who claims to be a black female. Now, and I thought, well, they can't, that will just be a bad look. It might cost them 3% of the vote. That's enough. It might disappoint the black community and the female community, people who vote on these issues, which they shouldn't, but they do, enough do. And so I thought, well, they won't go with Newsom. They will, but they can't go with Kamala. She's too much of a moron. So I thought that they would go with Michelle Obama. I thought, well, look, she ticks the box of being more black, certainly female, despite silly things I read on Twitter, which is nonsense, by the way, everybody. Uh, and I thought, well, they'll sub out Joe for Michelle. Now, what happened is, yes, they successfully, Team Obama and Nancy Pelosi did successfully destabilize Joe to the point he had to step aside. But then, the Clintons come out within a couple of minutes saying, and Joe Biden comes out in a couple of minutes, they say, we endorse Kamala. The Obamas said, oh, we need an open convention. We need an open convention. They got their friends in Black Lives Matter to say we need an open convention. But then there was this big movement, Kamala's it, Kamala's it. So I think they'll go Michelle 2028. But anyway, my original opinion is that Kamala is just too much of an idiot and a clown. All this sort of insecurity and laughing in this weird way and never saying anything of interest and just betraying. She says one thing one day, something totally opposite the next day. She just gets over it. I expected her to have a honeymoon. I thought it would be like when Kevin Rudd came back in mid-2013. I expected then it would be a 3-week honeymoon, and then it fell apart, and that's exactly what happened. But I thought it would be a repeat of that. Look, she had a pretty good honeymoon for 2.5 months. There was no doubt about that. Money flooded in and celebrity endorsements, etc. Now she's not doing any interviews or anything. Well, she's starting to do now. Now it's backfiring on her, which is funny to see. So she, look, I'll give up. If I need to say something positive about her, she did win the first debate because she would have had really hardcore professionals instructing her how to bait Trump. And I obviously told her at some point, just say in the middle of the debate that your crowd sizes, Kamala, are bigger than Trump's, and that'll just set him off. And that's exactly what happened. Okay, so he did fall for the debate on several occasions, and Kamala was looking pretty good. Now she was ahead on the betting markets up until about 2 or 3 weeks ago, and since then, every day I get up, first thing I check is the US betting markets, and Trump just is sort of edging ahead. So now he's down to about $1.70, which is, there's lots of football teams that have been $1.70, before the game starts, and they lose the game. So it's still really, really losable from here. But the trend is Trump's friend. And another thing that needs to be pointed out is that Trump's polling in October 2016 and October 2020, so the 4 weeks before the election, Trump's polls went up 2 or 3%. And that appears to be happening now again. Okay, but the reason I'm still thinking this is a 50-50 race is because in 2022, in the midterms, the polls said that the Republicans were going to win, the Senate and the House, and lots of governor races and everything else, and it was very, very disappointing. So the polls can be out, but look, I suppose I'm thinking at the moment the betting market's right. Trump's probably the slight favourite.
Yeah. So apart from the fact that she won the debate, is there anything policy-wise that the Democrats bring to the table that is in any way something that is positive for someone with a libertarian worldview, do you think?
Well, the only thing I can think of is that they are critical of Trump's tariff policy. Okay, but I heard earlier today that when Trump did bring in some limited tariffs in his first term, Joe Biden kept them in place. Okay, so I can't think. I'm interested. Have you got anything off the top of your head? Where would we say Kamala is better than Trump?
Well, no, I don't know. Because like we look at the Democrats and you see all the problems that are there, which I think we see, Democrats themselves probably don't see. We see, the DEI stuff, which I think is stupid. The reparation stuff, which is stupid. The wanting to expand welfare and spending is stupid. The warmongering is stupid. The like the using of lawfare against opposing candidates and opposing like supporters and stuff, I think is crazy. And when I look at that, I think all of that is so insanely bad. I know that our worldview allows us to see that. What is it that they see within her, within that movement? Is there something positive in there? And I don't know. That's I suppose why I'm asking.
Well, Elon Musk put out a tweet earlier showing the political affiliation of professors across the major American universities. Something like about 93% of them are left-wing Democrats. Okay, so they are the brains trusts. Okay, and they're the people whose ideas filter down to their top students and their bottom students, and they go into media and they go into the law and they go into politics and they go into the corporate world. So all these sort of influences have been very skillfully manipulated in their thinking to be stupid enough to think Trump's a fascist, Trump's a racist and Trump's a sexist, and blah, 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 blah. And it's all crap. And I think that there's a lot of fear involved. I think that people, particularly in the corporate world, because there's very few exceptions where a big corporate isn't, woke. And people think, I don't really want to work out what's right or wrong about woke. I want to work out where I need to sit on it so that I might get a promotion next year. So that's what they think about. So they sort of, they'd have to say, well, if it comes, when you work in a corporation, you work with people 9 hours a day or more, whatever, you get a feel for how they're going to vote. Whether it's just a little comment over the coffee or something. After you've worked with someone for 6 to 12 months, you get a feel for whether they're going to be Trump or Kamala. Now, these people who are ambitious in these corporations, they just sort of made a decision, if I'm going to send out a signal, I've got to send out a signal, I'm pro-Kamala. And they sort of talk themselves into it out of fear. And it's the same, getting promoted at the universities. So there's, it's dark days. Now, if Trump wins, the interesting question then is, how will he govern? I mean, last time he sort of his top staff were half MAGA and half swamp. I think he's learned his lesson. I think Trump does have a sort of a natural impulse to sort of just want to get along with people and put conflict in the past, but they've tried to put him in jail about 7 times. They fined him $500 million over some absolutely made up BS claim about him going, the guy that owns Miss Universe, going into the equivalent of David Jones in New York in the middle of the day, and he sexually assaults somebody. I mean, as if. But $500 million fine for that. Thank you, Mr. Trump. Wasn't found liable criminally, of course, on the balance of probabilities. So they've thrown all this stuff at him. But so he might really he might want to, in his second term, think, look, if I don't clean out this swamp this time, not just talk about it, America's, the counter revolution will be on again in 4 years' time. So he might really think I reckon there's about 50 to 100 people who need to be prosecuted for fiddling with the laws to persecute Trump. And what I would do if I was Trump is I would let them be prosecuted, let them be found guilty, let them be sentenced, and then pardon them. Okay, and I don't want to seem like I'm a softie, but we don't want to set up a tit-for-tat thing of jailing our political opponents. Okay, we've got to be the good guys, but they've got to send a message. You just can't go around and corrupt the courts and make up evidence and raid Mar-a-Lago in the middle of the night and all this other BS. Again, the people that underfunded his secret service to increase the chances that he gets shot. I didn't want him to get shot, but they just would have thought, oh, that's Trump's Trump. Oh, we've got to cut his funding, just out of malice. So and all the people behind the mule, all the invention about the Russian collusion delusion. Okay, there's got to be some justice here, but then I do urge Trump to then just pardon the whole goddamn lot of them. Okay, it'll be like what brought down Rome in the end was, Sulla and Marius, these back and forward purges, and it just sort of leaves bad blood, even though they might bloody deserve it. Okay, we should say, to Adam Schiff and all these terrible people. So look, you did bad things, but you've been sentenced to jail, but we're going to pardon you. That's what I hope Trump does. I hope that I hope that he really has learned his lesson about how crazy and demented his opponents are, and we've got to prevent it being able to ever happen again.
Yeah, and hopefully he's learnt to recognize the swamp this time around, because I think even last time he may have had every intention of draining the swamp, but I don't think he had the know-how to recognize what around him was a swamp.
Yes, he was new to Washington. I believe it was because he didn't know the swamp. It was a campaign slogan, good campaign slogan. We all liked it, probably got him votes. But now he has been a massive victim of the swamp creatures. And now he knows who he can trust and who he can't trust. Now, so that's the best case scenario, that we're sitting here in 2.5 weeks, Pietro, we're wondering how will the Trump administration go. Now, then there's two other options. First option is that Kamala wins quite comfortably. And then the other option is that Kamala wins narrowly. And then Trump says fraud. Okay, now that's sort of like the horror scenario for the Great Republic. We've all gotten but we're talking about America. Australia in particular has got an investment in the success of America. Now I think they did cheat in 2020. I don't think it was the counting machines. It was the Hunter Biden laptop.
Yeah.
It was and the big tech colluding with them, and there was multiple things. Okay, but I don't think it was the voter fraud. But who knows? Because they won't stop at anything to damage Trump. So then, if we're back, I mean, it'll just be unbearable if Kamala's declared the winner by CNN and MSNBC and Fox News at 24 hours within a day of winning the election, and then Trump says, "I think we was robbed." Now,
Yeah, well, that was going to be one of my questions and I don't know if that's the only one that's a negative, possible like worst case scenario, because a narrow Trump victory as well. Like if you put yourself in the mind state of those that your typical Democrat voters, or even not typical, but the more extreme radical ones, of which there are a lot. Like America has become so deeply divided across those two lines. And those people who saw Trump as Hitler, Satan himself, the worst possible thing in the world, once he was president, and then finally they got him out, to have to deal with him coming back in again and just like the PTSD of all the worst moments of their lives. I think even a narrow Trump or like I don't see I can see a lot of trouble with whoever wins this election, with the other side not accepting it, refusing to accept. Do you see anything in that?
well, the Democrats certainly did invent the whole concept of election fraud. I mean, Al Gore never got over it. He walked around for 8 years saying, I'm the rightfully elected president, blah, blah. He was extremely malicious about it. Hillary Clinton, 2016.
Yep.
So when they don't win, they did invent it. You'd have to think if Trump wins narrowly, and if CNN and MSNBC declare, okay, Trump's won, and they officially declare it, and it's very narrow, but they do declare it, you'd have to think these people have got some modicum of pride after they've been crapping on and on and on and on about how evil it was for Trump not to accept it in 2020, for them to then say, oh, no, fraud. You'd have to think, but nothing's beyond them. So
Well,
the best,
when
there's only
when
one
they're
good
the ones
outcome.
saying that, sorry, when they're the ones saying now that he's the one blocking the border being secured after 4 years, I don't know if they've got that pride. They're willing to say whatever.
Yeah, right. It's very true. So I hope there's only one good outcome here, and that is a decisive Trump victory. That's the only good outcome here.
Um, okay, well, that's the bulk of what I wanted to know from you regarding the US election. I did just briefly want to ask you recently, when I spoke about it now in the last episode that we did by ourselves, but New South Wales recently had sorry, well, before I go into New South Wales Council, was there anything else that you think we've missed about the US election that we should mention?
No, I think we've covered the election. I gave a speech in Parliament last week endorsing Trump. So, and that was basically saying, Trump stands in the tradition of George Washington and Dwight Eisenhower, where he's opposed to the military-industrial complex. So that's the biggest reason why we're pro-Trump around here.
Yeah, well, that's good enough reason for me, certainly. So yes, I did also want to talk to you about the success that the New South Wales Council candidates had in the recent election. I think was the final tally 10 New South Wales councillors elected.
10, yes, but look, we've made a bit of noise during the campaign and since, and we're hopeful. There was a few hundred people elected as independents, and we're hopeful that with time, some of them might decide to join the party and sit as the Libertarians. So, look, we were lucky that the Liberals, in many cases, forgot to put in the nomination form, and then in many cases, the Liberal Party local candidates sort of said, "Look, if you can't vote for me, vote for Libertarians." But look, I think that we capitalised on it well. Up on the Mid-Coast Council at the last council elections, the Liberal Party did contest it, and they got 13% of the vote. Then we got 26% of the vote. So it wasn't just the Liberal Party nomination debacle. So when you're a growing little party, you take the luck you get, and then you try to capitalise on it. Now, then we probably got a little bit overconfident with the 3 by-elections we had in Sydney over the weekend. In retrospect, we should have just focused our resources of our little party on one of them. So we stretched ourselves a bit thin, and we've ended up sort of with 3 to 4% across those by-elections. So that was sobering. But what we did learn is where we handed out a flyer with a hardcore, bold libertarian message, often our vote was 6, 7, 8%. Okay, so that is the lesson that we've learned. A good, bold flyer talking about cutting taxes, etc., does win votes.
Okay, well that's good. So was there a much higher turnout in the areas where there was someone handing? Is that what you're saying, that the areas that had someone handing a how to vote had a much higher percentage turnout than the others?
Yes, absolutely. But particularly when the flyer has a seriously hardcore message.
Okay, so were there 2 different styles of flyers? One which was a bit more mild.
Correct. Yes.
Okay, well, that's an interesting takeaway because yeah, in many ways, like we as the Victorians, we know that I mean, I'm jealous to some extent. I know New South Wales are a bit more the radical ones, and I lean that way more myself. But I know that Victoria is a bit more the pleasing everyone style of messaging. So I think it's going to be an interesting experiment to see which one of the 2 strategies works best moving forward, especially since we've got the federal election coming up.
Yes, absolutely.
All right. Well, look, that's all I wanted to ask you for today. Thank you so much again for your time, John. We're both going to be eagerly awaiting what happens with this US election, and I look forward to hearing your thoughts either in Parliament or maybe on the show again. Who knows? After to dissect the aftermath of whatever happens.
Well, thanks very much for having me, Pietro. Enjoyed the conversation as always.
If you don't already, you can follow us on YouTube, Instagram, Spotify, or X. And other than that, we will catch you next time.